what Luther got wrong. This was my big plan for how to celebrate the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, and nobody else wanted to do it. Peterson wanted to do it, which is why he's brought me in here belatedly in 2018. Nobody else liked this. Everybody wanted to do the jingoistic rah-rah sis boom bah for 2017. And that was great. I hope that your circuit Reformation party was just as magical as mine was. So that's neat. But it is hard for you and I to understand the personal importance of Martin Luther to the first 3 or 4 generations of the Reformation. And I'll prove that to you by in a moment, by just how much you don't get it. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. You're almost certainly smarter than I am. You probably get it. It was all very surprising to me. Very surprising to me. So I grew up, Lutheran and interested in Luther stuff. A lot of you guys know Rick Stuckwich. His dad was my pastor, Don. Really sharp guy, really interesting. So at a young age, before I went off to go to Seward, I had read a lot of, what I thought of was a lot of Luther. I read the Large Catechism, I'd read the Bondage of the Will, I had read, other stuff that he gave me. My favorite devotional book, Luther for the Busy Man. Anybody got this book? That's an awesome, Wade's got it. Wade's got every book. Published down in Adelaide, and it's like Portals of Prayer, but all the devotions are by Luther. And it goes through the 1-year lectionary, and then it's just out of the little snippets out of the sermons. Really good book. So, and then, I went to Seward and made the excellent career choice to major in theology. Super useful. Man, if this pastor thing doesn't work out, I'm going to be what's known as homeless. Mamas don't let your babies grow up to be theology majors. So, I got as much as one of our Concordias could give, had a really super excellent independent study in my senior year with a really smart prof, and we did, Luther readings. So we read, the Hans Obermann biography, and we read Bainton, and we read the Bondage of the Will, and, Erasmus's, his original work and his reply, and I had seminary education that you all had, and again, there are electives and all these things. I feel like I knew Luther pretty well, as well as any interested Lutheran pastor is going to know him. And then I get these gigs from CPH. Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's go here first. At least since Paul, your doctrine has been judged by the piety and person of the preacher. Right? Can I stipulate this? That a lot of St. Paul's epistles, St. Paul says things like, "Be ye imitators of me, as I am of Christ." St. Paul spends, a couple, 3 chapters here and there through 1 Corinthians, defending his ministry, defending his person, right? And now I'll speak like a madman, right? I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees of the tribe of Benjamin, yada, yada, yada. So Paul's personal witness that he lived his doctrine, that he was a good person, was very important. And really the book of Acts, that's the second half of the Acts of Paul, are a study in his personality, right? That really comes strongly across. That Paul was, I don't know, how would you describe Paul? Snide? Tricky? Right? Apt to lose his temper, but really wise and good and kind. It's a fascinating study. That business where he's sitting there in the Sanhedrin and he goes, aha, I am being persecuted for being a Pharisee. No, you aren't. You're being persecuted because you said Jesus Christ rose from the dead. But boy, howdy, he knew how to get out of a tight spot. So the personality is very important. How about Augustine and Jerome? There's this, one of the things I translated for the new Luther's works was a set of theses that Luther put together on digamy. Not bigamy, but digamy. Bigamy, you all know about. It's where you're married to 2 wives at the same time. Digamy is if your first wife dies and you get remarried. And the question is, can you be a pastor? Because St. Paul says you be the husband of one wife. And so this was a hot topic once Lutherans started ordaining their own people. And this guy had written a work from within Lutheranism and arguing that no, if your wife dies, then you can't remarry and remain in the pulpit. And I believe that's canon law in the East, I believe. I don't think a priest can remarry. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's canon law in the East. And so this was, Lutherans are kind of feeling this out. How's this married priest thing going to work? Because, it's a little awkward. Your wife kicks the bucket. Who you going to date? There's a point. You see the point of the canon law. Hilarity ensues. It's the start of a sitcom, the vicar of Wibley or, et cetera. Okay, so at any rate, so in the midst of this, Luther quotes this work by Jerome, and he's talking about, Jerome's thing is actually about whether or not a bishop can be married. And Jerome is arguing, yes, the bishop can be married, and it's a case of like Auxentius, and don't ask me of where, Auxentius of some place in Spain. And it became this famous case, and they argued about it. And perhaps second only to St. Paul in terms of can be a real jerk. Oh, Jerome. This work is so good. He's got this great line in there where he's like, these guys are saying, the bishop can't be married and all the problems this can be. He's like, I heard that you can even be a bishop if you totally knocked up some chick before you were baptized and then shoved her off to North Africa because your mommy told you to. I've heard that maybe could happen. P.S. There's no way Augustine's love child was really named Quodvult Deus. Or what? No, that's, what is it? It's the same translation. God wills, whatever his name is. It's a pen name for confessions, right? And the chick is never named. They're still alive, like in hiding in North Africa or something. So anyway, so Augustine and Jerome, they're constantly, they're going after each other, and Augustine kind of tries to pretend to be above it a little bit. But, Jerome, he's just a priest. That gets said. So it's good stuff. And so we get to the same thing when it comes to Luther. We get these arguments focus around who he is, how he lives, what he believes, and a good portion of the polemics during Luther's lifetime and in the 2 generations after are about Luther more than Lutheran doctrine, especially the early Roman Catholic polemics against Lutheranism are against Luther. And you'll still find this is still very current amongst whatever the equivalent is of issues, etc., listening Roman Catholics, whatever that equivalent is. What they know about Luther is that he was, a sexually deviant monk, right? This is their thing. That he's this lowly monk. He's all tied. He's vulgar and he's all tied up about his sexuality. And this is all really just about him needing to leave the monastery and get married. Sort of like our politics was said. I don't know. Okay. So, and again, this is really foreign to us today. We like to judge things by doctrine. We are Enlightenment people. You and I. Nobody can actually believe in postmodernism after they get married and have kids. It's just impossible. Everybody can believe it in college, and I guess if you stay in the academy, you can try, but nobody believes it. We are all Enlightenment people. We do believe in truth. We do believe that things should be argued out, and so we like to judge things by doctrine. And so what I'm going to read you probably is going to sound very weird to you. But that's not what they thought about it, even when you get down to the 3rd generation after the Reformation. So I'm going to read you stuff that's included in John Gerhardt's Theological Commonplaces, commonplace number 25 on the church. And in this, Gerhard is arguing about the validity of the Lutheran Church. Because, again, this first point I have up here under Luther, that the Reformation was felt to be epochal. The Reformation was felt deep in the bones of the people who followed the Reformers to be, in some sense, wrong. Wrong in the terms and kind of discomfited or horrified. This was rending the unity of the church. Just at the time when the Turks are attacking Vienna, we're going to have this argument that's going to rend our society apart. You better believe, there's a reason, right? The Augsburg Confession spends the amount of time it spends on that in 1530, on that point, right? Because this was felt to be, why are you doing this? Does this really be this important? Don't we have bigger fish to fry? Why are you, tearing apart the unity of Christendom? Okay, let's say it has to happen. Well, you're tearing apart the unity of Christendom. Who told you could do that? Right? Are you so sure you're right? And again, it's hard to understand for us today how deeply that was felt. But here's Gerhard. And I'm going to read some things to you. They're going to sound to you very silly. And so I'm going to start up by also saying, John Gerhard is smarter than you. I mean, like, way, way smarter than you. Okay? Again, there's probably one person in this room who would be smarter than John Gerhard. Well, on the last day, we'll ask who that was. No, Dr. Mays left. He shouldn't have left. He deserved it. But that's pretty much, and Ben will tell you the same thing. It's this very humbling to work on this Gerhard stuff. Very humbling. Because again, you think you know Greek and Latin and Hebrew, not as well as these guys. You have Logos and Google to look up your quotations. These guys didn't. There's the volume of work and just how top of mind all this knowledge is for them. He's amazing. He's a better Lutheran than you too. I'm going to stipulate that. Really knows his stuff. Knows a lot of things that you and I have forgotten. With all that said, welcome to The Past is Another Country, or time to board the crazy train. As far as the office of reforming and of revealing the Antichrist are concerned, it is obvious that in it something unique is happening, which does not fit with the ordinary call of all other ministers. So you see that they feel it to be epochal. This is not normal. This is not the normal job of a university professor in Christendom. It must be admitted that God did not call him, that is Luther, immediately to this as he called the prophets and apostles, and he did not speak by the immediate inspiration of the Holy Spirit as the prophets and apostles did. In this sense, some people deny that Luther's call is extraordinary, that is immediate. Yet no one can deny that something extraordinary and unique occurred in his work of reformation and of revealing the Antichrist. Many centuries earlier, this had been prophesied by the prophets and apostles. Where? You know at least one. Where is the Bible prophecy of Luther? Revelation 14:6. You did prepare for Reformation 500 when you saw that totally bizarre epistle lesson for Reformation that you had never used before. And now you know why. It used to be on the masthead of the Lutheran Witness, little picture of chubby Luther and two cherubim holding up a banner with Revelation 14:6 on it. But did you know Jeremiah 51:48, Daniel 11:44, Malachi 4:5-2, 2 Thessalonians 2:8? Well, keep listening. He had been equipped for this duty with unique and extraordinary gifts of the Holy Spirit. This is something that is clearly proved by his heroic spirit, his happy success, his unique gift of interpreting the scriptures, and many other things, among which, let's start with, we, on the other hand, can truly affirm that prophecies were made by and about Luther, and the facts have confirmed them clearly. So here's a quote from Luther, Jena edition of his works, volume 7, page 304. I do not prophesy willingly, nor do I want to prophesy. Whatever I foretell, especially something bad, very often turns out that way. In fact, more often than I wish. so that I often yearn deeply with St. Micah, oh, that I were not a man with a spirit, and that I spoke lies. Tanner says that Luther foretold false things, that he was therefore a false prophet because the outcome did not correspond to the prophecies. So that's Roman Catholic, Englishman, in fact, that Gerhardt's quoting. We respond, 4 points must be remembered about such predictions, the origin of the predictions. Then he goes on, he's going to defend the fact that Luther is a prophet, or at least made prophecies that came true. So what were those like? Well, how about Luther predicted that the frenzy of his enemies would not harm him. He predicted that while he was alive, no war for the sake of religion would begin. The outcome has certified the truth of both predictions. Melanchthon, in his speech on the life and death of Luther, mentions more of the same sort of material. During the Diet of Augsburg, when the situation seemed to be riding on a razor's edge, Luther, absent for a time, and remember, Luther wasn't at Augsburg, right? Luther, absent for a time, emerged from his little room after serious prayers to God, and with a loud and joyful voice, he repeated again and again, "We have overcome." He found out at the same time the decree of the emperor had been published that no one should suffer any loss because of his confession of the evangelical doctrine. So Luther's 30 miles away, he goes in to pray, and he comes out knowing that all is well. The prophecies that Luther made can be arranged into two classes. For some are set forth in Holy Writ, and some are in the history of the church. From Holy Writ, we should place here what is said in Daniel 8:25 about the Antichrist under the time of Antiochus, that he would be broken without a hand. That is, that he would be destroyed not with physical weapons by the powers of this age, but by the preaching of the gospel through Luther. QED. In Daniel 11:44, here there is this prediction: tidings from the east and from the north will alarm him, that is the Antichrist. Those tidings mean the sincere preaching of the gospel and the testimony of the truth opposed to the errors of Antichrist. According to the interpretation of the apostles, 2 Thessalonians 2:8 and Revelation 14:6, those tidings make Christ the day spring from on high to shine forth. This will greatly upset the Antichrist, though the same tidings will happen to those. Okay, so you're like, well, okay, that's not too bad. It's just, this is going to come. Well, wait. Jeremiah 51:48, the destroyers of Babylon shall come from the north, says the Lord. That was fulfilled when the spiritual tyranny of Babylon, as the kingdom of the Antichrist is called in the Revelation, was attacked from the north through Luther. Jeremiah 51:27 and 33, Ararat, Minni, and Ashkenaz will thresh Babylon. But now Minni and Ashkenaz were minors, as is evident from the histories in the Hebrew language. Therefore, it denotes Luther, the son of an Eisleben miner, born in the country of Mansfeld, which is said to have its name from Minni or Manni. With the hammer of the word, he threshed the spiritual Babylon. He himself uses this expression in the Jaina edition, etc. The Ashkenaz are the Twiscones, or Germans. From this comes the name Ascania, or Aschersleben. Ararat is the mountain on which the ark of Noah landed, and the dove brought Noah the olive branch. In the mines of Mansfield are often found split rocks, in which are discovered fish painted in golden color. By them is signified that after the spiritual flood, the Lord's ark is going to have a place there, and the doctrine of the gospel will be spread throughout the world from there. I mean, this is stuff you expect to find from Kenneth Copeland. Right? They found fossils in Mansfeld. QED, Luther, Reformation stuff. Minni signifies a metallic substance. Minererz, mineral ore. Manus was the son of Twisco, the first king of the Germans. Therefore, the Holy Spirit was not far from saying, he was close to saying, a man from Mansfield, a miner, will be raised up against Babylon. Just as 1517 years before the birth of Christ, the children of Israel were freed from Egyptian captivity and the tyranny of the Pharaoh, so also, precisely 1517 years after the birth of Christ, our forefathers were freed from the spiritual Egypt of the Roman Pharaoh. Now see, you would have been more prepared for last October if you'd have been reading Gerhardt. If you'd get this subscription, you should do this. There's all this stuff about Revelation 14:6, which again, you probably know about. So let's go on to my personal favorite, the numerology, pointing to Luther. We can supply far more prophecies like this from the history of the church. In the ecclesiastical hymn of Ambrose and Augustine, we praise thee, O God, which, right? Peterson today told us, is kind of the Bible. That was in the sermon. I was listening to the sermon. Kind of the Bible. You don't know how much. The numerical letters in the verse, tibi, cherubim, et seraphim, incessabili voce proclamant. If you take just the Roman letters out of there, the I's and the V's and the C's and the D's, right? They add up to 1517. The year in which Luther began the work of Reformation. Dresserus mentions that in the year 1266, there was a duke in a Saxon household who was called Luther. Okay, that's random. In a prophecy included in a song to which the name Sibyl was attached to the Sibylline oracles, right? Die sirai, die sila, cum David, cum Sibylla, right? With David and the Sibyls testify about this. This is a big thing in the Middle Ages, these Sibylline oracles. There's also a prediction of the destruction of the imagined church of the true succession. It goes on. So Luther's in the Sibylline oracles. That's great. This one is good too. Around the year 1152, Frederick Barbarossa constructed a temple in Carinthia, which was called das große Turmstrippen Wusterhall. He decorated it with various pictures and statues, among which has been found a stone statue that had the form of a monk with a tonsure, whose body was girt with a cord, a big cord, and over the head was written with capital letters, Lutherus. Theophilus Paracelsus reports this in the description of Carinthia that was printed in Strasbourg. So there you go. So in 1152, Frederick Barbarossa got a prophecy and put it in stone. You know the Jan Hus stuff, right? Jan Hus, kill me, and a swan's going to come by. You like that one. You thought that was just kind of neat. No, they all believe that and more. Oh man, more numerology. I love the numerology. So Wolff observes that great mysteries have been hidden in the names of Moses and of Christ. If you reduce the name Moises, in the Greek version, into numbers, it makes 1648. Why is that a big year anyway? Well, he wouldn't know, would he? Gerhard wouldn't know. But man, see how right he was? That's the last year of the 30 Years' War. If you count backward that many years from Christ's death, you come to the year of the world, 2348. About that time, a priest involved with divinations told King Amenhotep to pay attention to the sons of the Hebrews because one was going to be born who would lead the Israelites out of Egypt and who would humiliate the kingdom of the Egyptians. This is according to Josephus and Lyra. So also the name Christ reduced to numbers gives 1480 years. He, 600, Rho, 100, and so forth. When added, these numbers total 1480. Around the end of that many number of years since the birth of Christ, all the seers and mystics and prophets, Lubertus Hanschild, Wesselt, St. Vincent's, Purvius, Barrett, Capistrano, Torquatus, Savonarola, Father Nicholas the Hermit, Albus Leichheisen, I don't even know, Father Fleck, Jacobus de Per, this list goes on. You've never heard of these people. I've never heard of these people, but many others shouted with one mouth that the gospel had been defiled, miserably obliterated, and almost lost from the church because of the abuses and filth of the papal traditions. They foretold that a reformation of the church and religion was imminent, and that a man would be born who would purge the teachings of the gospel, clean it of its filthiness, restore the light of divine truth to the world. All this happened in the case of Martin Luther, born in 1483, the same year that Hieronymus Savonarola, that great herald of the free mercy of God, was buried in Florence, etc. We could keep going. You get the idea. And I've got 6 more pages of this stuff. And again, I don't read this to belittle John Gerhardt. I absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt that he's a better Christian, a better man, a smarter man than I who stand before you today. But that's surprising, right? That's not from the world you live in. You consider all of that nuts. Yeah, I think it is nuts. But it gives you, but it's gonna lend, you need to know all that to know the importance of Luther in, you'll see how this is all gonna come full circle. So first I wanna deal with, a few things that Luther got wrong that you're probably, or arguably got wrong, that you're used to hearing about. So I'm gonna deal with 3 of them. I'm gonna deal with them rather quickly up to our break, and then I'll come back for the one that I'm gonna argue is the real thing Luther got wrong. But these, you heard about these in this 500th anniversary of the Reformation. So there's kind of Luther and politics, or a good case of that is Luther and the Peasants' War. So Luther, writes these things early in his career that remind you of nothing if not Marxist propaganda. And of course, these things were very influential with Marx and Lenin and with many other communists, as broad as that term can be in the years since, where Luther is haranguing the people who are oppressing the peasants, and he was really viewed as this guy who's going to throw off our chains. This leads this kind of rhetoric that the people do rise up, and then Luther famously, again, depending on your perspective, moderates his tone, throws them under the bus, tells the German princes to kill them all. The last part is true, and they do. And this kind of gets hung around Luther's neck. But again, this can be put in context, right? And here's a good Peter Blickel. This book, I think, is 1980 or 1983, but it's the modern, super detailed take on all this. And this is his, conclusion. The popular movement reached far back into the 15th century, and Luther created neither the demand for change nor even its religious expression. He did offer the movement two things. First, his own biblicism strengthened the popular doctrine of godly law as the norm for a Christian social order. And second, much more influential in his theology was his personal example as a rebel against the two great authorities in Christendom, that is, the Pope and the Emperor. So, so historians have looked at this, and it's kind of not fair to lay all the blame for these epochal changes that European society was simply ripe for. And so a lot of this defense of mistakes in Luther's life basically comes down to this stuff was going to happen, whether it was going to be whether the guy's name was going to be Luther or something else. These things could not be undone. And so this is so Luther and war, Luther and politics. That's a good one. Is this a defensible Luther? The bigamy of Philip of Hesse. This is one of the most interesting stories in the Reformation. And again, you probably know kind of back of the cereal box version of this, but the more detailed version is much better. So if you are a prince and you're going to inherit a kingdom, your marriage is likely going to be arranged, not exactly going to be a love match, right? So I don't know, let's say your name is Charles, and they want you to marry a nice, good-looking English girl, maybe from one of them fancy French-sounding families like a dispenser. And you're supposed to marry her, and you know this, right? This is the famous Red Book interview. And so there is the young, how old was Diana Spencer when she got married? Anybody know? 19, a real live young maiden, and a nice girl. And so there they are sitting down with this American magazine for their interview, and the gal asks, softball question. So, are you guys in love? And Diana's like, oh yes, I love Charles. And Charles' response, nobody knows this? People don't read Red Book? His response is, what is love? Yeah, like what is truth? Now, why was Charlie Boy saying that? Well, because he already had the lady he loved, and it wasn't sitting next to him. I mean, she was, sorry. It's like the old, what do you call a dog with wings? No, nobody knows that one? Okay, Diana McCarthy. So Charles is doing what princes have always done. You got to marry somebody, but you just got, you got your chicks on the side. No big deal. That's what it means to be royalty. Okay, so Philip, this is his life, right? He's got this gal. He's not really, he doesn't love her, but he had to marry her, and her name is Katerina of somewhere or other, or Christina Landgrave of, well, now she's the Landgraven of Hesse, sure, but wherever she's from, Lactitia or somewhere. So he's got to marry this gal, Christina. He doesn't like her, but, whatever, right? So you got your ladies on the side. But then Philip goes and gets religion. And he gets Lutheran religion. And so this starts to bother him. And he doesn't like the fact that he's a much more interesting figure just than maybe you know about. He's a tragic figure. So here he is, he's this guy, and he's got this gal on the side that he really loves, and he's so he's sleeping around on his wife, but he's just this one other gal. He's not just going down to the bar every night and picking a different chick up. He's got this gal he loves. He's got this gal he's married to. It's terrible. So he sits down and writes a letter in 1526. And he writes a letter to Luther, and he says, hey, in the Old Testament, sometimes people had more than one wife. And so let's imagine that, let's say there's a guy, and he's got this wife, and she's like diseased and everything's bad. And would it be okay for him to have a second wife like David had a second wife and all those guys back then had a second wife? You know what I mean? Asking for a friend. I'm not making that last part up. Doesn't mention this is about him. Just says, hey, I got to run marriage policy now in Hesse, and we got rid of canon law. And here's a tough question, we got to figure this out, bro, asking for a friend. And Luther writes back, he's like, no, I get what you're saying, and maybe in some crazy circumstance where, a woman, comes down with some terrible disease and essentially needs care, but she can't produce children or perform other wifely duties, there might be some case for some exception to this, but no. Okay. Time goes by, and the next time he writes, a few years later after, and he stops going to communion, right? Like I said, he gets religion. He knows his life is not right. He's not going to the Lord's Supper. And the next time he writes, which, 1534 or something, he says, actually, this is about me. And he wants an opinion from, and he gets it from Luther and Melanchthon, saying that, hey, and so at any rate, their response is worth reading. It's very long. It makes all the caveats that you would want to make about how, this is not the greatest, and really this is only about you as a Christian prince because of this very, unique thing in your life. And at the end of it, it would be better, don't put away your wife like Henry VIII. Don't do that. That's not right. It would be better if, you can't live in continence. It would be better if you imitated the prophets of old in the Old Testament and took a second wife on the down low, right? This is between us, right? Right? This is going to stay between us. And of course, now Philip of Hesse, who is, we haven't explained the real importance of him. He is the guy who invented the Small Chaldaic League. He is the power broker and physical defender of Protestantism in Germany. He's the guy. And so again, it's hard to come up with an example of the importance of this. I guess maybe a little bit there's a famous story from the American Civil War when people come to Lincoln and he complains and they're complaining that Grant is a drunk, and he is a drunk, and Lincoln famously responds, well, if these other guys could win victories like Vicksburg, please send them whatever Grant's drinking. So it's kind of the same thing what Luther's doing here with Hesse, right? Right? We need this guy. And you can also read, I would like which of you pastors is not kind of soft pedal to truth when somebody comes to you with a tricky question? Okay? All right. But, and here's the best we can do. This article is awesome. This is from the Journal of American Theology in 1913. I have no idea who this Faulkner guy is, but this journal was awesome. It was when Protestants thought being Protestant was cool. And it's seriously a great article. But so this is the best he can do. for defending the bigamy of Philip episode. We cannot blame Catholics for making the most of the sins of the Reformation men. It's a small compensation for the great loss in the 16th century. Philip was indeed licentious, and this element in his blood worked as one motive in these bigamy proceedings. But he came honestly by his predisposition to these sins. His good Catholic father, the Landgrave Willem der Midderle, is called by the Zimmer Chronicle an unclean satyr, and his vice gave him the French disease, which for those of you in Rio Linda is syphilis. So, all the way from the New World to your front door, syphilis, now in color. So that's the best you can do for this one. Yeah, I mean, this is one. I mean, I think we should be honest. I think, Luther and the Peasants' War, there's a fine explanation for that. But this one's just bad. I mean, bad call, bad politics, and bad religion. It's Richelieu. Worse than committing a sin, he made a mistake. Right? This really messed things up because now Philip is an imperial felon. Right? He's a bigamist. And so now Charles V can attack, and this obviously goes to the heart of what the Roman Catholic polemic against Lutheranism was, which is basically it's an antinomian sect. The free gospel of the forgiveness of sins means I can do whatever I want, like have 2 wives. Here's your great captain of the Reformation. So this is an own goal. This is wrong. There's an example of, he just got it wrong, and we should just say he was wrong. And then this is, of course, the famous one on the Jews and their lies. There's the cover page. You bet, this got picked up in the 30s in Germany, the 1930s in Germany, and those unfortunate circumstances, and was republished and distributed. And it says that the Jews should be those that won't convert should be forcibly removed. There are many excellent treatments of this, from its cultural, political, and theological context. Just about every solid biography of Luther deals with it very well. So Bainton or Brecht or Obermann. For answers to pressing contemporary questions, Yui Simonetto did a great look at this. He's that guy who used to work for the UPI as a reporter, and he's German, ethnic German, with a name like Yui. It has to be from Dune or from Germany. And he did a great book on this, The Fabricated Luther, where he kind of defends, explains that what the Nazi regime was doing with Luther is really not okay. And again, there's tons of context to put this in. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Why not 1491? Why not 1493? Anybody know? Because in 1492, the Reconquista was over. They had finally expelled all the Mormons. Would that it were so. All the Moors, all the Muslims from Spain. This is, in The Princess Bride, Inigo Montoya is very bent on revenge. That is a very worthy stereotype. Spain was invaded and conquered in completely. It was all done being conquered 730. Let's just call it roughly. And the Spanish fought a rearguard action until they kicked the Muslims out in 1492. That's 760-year grudge. Don't mess with the Spaniards. They will not forget. And so that's why he sails in that year. And then the Jews who were in Spain, what choice did they get? Convert or leave. So, I don't think they didn't really kill anybody. The Inquisition was strong in Spain because what they were inquisiting about were these people, and I can't remember their name, and there's suspicion that Columbus was one of them, that he was a Jew who was pretending to be Christian, that he was from one of these families. And they have a name, Conversos, thank you, yes, that's it. So that they had converted for the sake of staying in Spain. And so, again, this milieu that Luther is living in is just not your post-Thomas Jefferson world. These are people of a different culture, of a different race, of a different creed, living in the midst of a larger society. And of course, that's a powder keg. No matter if it's Protestants or Roman Catholics in Northern Ireland, or whether it's Hindus and Muslims in Kashmir, or whether it's Shia and Sunni in Iraq, Um, you know, America is the first, we're making a go of it, of this multiculturalism, multinationalism, all under one roof. We've made the best go of it that anybody's ever done. You could say the Romans did, but they really left all their communities in situ, right? So wow. So again, even this one, which many people think of as the key example of, oh man, did Luther get things wrong by our standards today? Even that one has some contextualization that makes it understandable, more so than the bigamy of Philip, I think. I mean, the bigamy of Philip is just so utterly bad. This fits into a wider cultural argument of how do you live? How should a minority that is live in the midst of a majority when they have an inherent conflict? Because remember, Luther is really mad. Luther sponsors the first translation of the Quran into Latin so people can read it in the West. And he was similarly very interested in the Talmud. And when Luther starts to find out what Jews say about Christians, Christianity, our Lord, and Mary in the Talmud, things do not end well. And so this is, and is this not still a hot topic in our society? How, and in the news in Europe, how do you have a majority population, which is now largely post-Christian? How do you deal with an immigrant community that's Islamic? So same kind of question, same kind of powder keg. So even that one again is, I'm not here to excuse Luther of any of this, but I am here to try to be an honest historian and an honest theologian. And so those are the three kind of common ones, right? Lutheran, the Peasants' War, Lutheran politics, Lutheran, the bigamy of Philip, Lutheran, the Jews. On 2 out of 3, we can at least give, to make it understandable, to put it in a historical context. 1 out of 3, yeah, bigamy of Philip, I got nothing good to say about it. Own goal, bad precedent, bad theology, bad pastoral care, and bad imperial politics. When we come back from our break, we'll turn to the new material that perhaps you've not thought about before, and we'll talk about, these are small potatoes. When we come back from the break, I'm going to make the argument that Luther really was not right on something theological that has ramifications down for today, and which means that if you could sue the ELCA for calling themselves Lutheran, you would lose the case, because they have just as much right to that name as you do.